Bibliothecarius Modernus, the Modern Librarian. I'm Ryan Wolfslayer, and this is a project I've been working on for about a year and a half now. There's a lot of Latin Christian literature out there. Thousands of texts spanning about 1,500 years from the 3rd century through the medieval period. Most of it sits in digital archives right now, often free to download, fully digitized. Much of it has never been translated into English. For anyone who doesn't read Latin, these texts might as well not exist. So why hasn't someone translated them? Translation is labor-intensive. A Latin scholar building a career has more professional incentive to publish articles than to spend 6 months translating an obscure treatise. Publishers often don't want to pay for translations that might sell 50 copies or less. And so the predictable result? Canonical authors like Augustine, Jerome, Gregory the Great, they get multiple translations, while everyone else stays locked within Latin. The economics have just never worked. Here's the realization that launched this project. Translation is an information access problem. The same principles that govern making digital collections discoverable and usable apply to making texts in dead languages accessible. I've spent nearly a decade as a librarian building systems that solve access problems. This is the same kind of problem. It just happens to involve Latin. Quick background on me. I'm a library systems developer, nearly 10 years in digital libraries at this point. My day job involves building infrastructure that helps librarians and researchers automating workflows, integrating metadata systems, connecting things like Crossref and ORCID and name authorities. This project applies that same approach to a specific access problem that I personally kept running into while studying Latin on my own. So what does the project actually produce? There are 3 main outputs. First is YouTube. This is a growing collection now of over 200 videos with audio narration that has the Latin text displayed on the screen. Second is a blog that has the side-by-side Latin and English interlinear view, plus some deep research on each text that explains who the author was, the historical context, and often why the text matters within history or theology. And then there's some permanent archives. I use archive.org for the long-term preservation of the audio files, GitHub for the structured translation data, and Zenodo for DOIs and citation. The primary source is Patrologia Latina, which is a 221-volume collection of Latin Christian texts that were compiled in the 19th century. I've touched about 70 of these volumes so far, with roughly 100 different authors translated. The content ranges from theological treatises to hagiographies, saint biographies, to disputations, letters, church council proceedings, and more. A 6th century letter from Mapinius of Worms about purchasing hogs for a parish gets the same treatment as what may be arguably more important, like a theological treatise, and yet each text gets its day in the sun. Now the interesting question isn't whether AI can translate Latin. It definitely can, and that's been true for a while. The interesting question is, how do you build a system where AI does the translation reliably? repeatedly and at scale without constant supervision. That's what the rest of this presentation is about. So what is an AI agent? So first, some terminology. You've probably used a chatbot at this point. You've asked it questions, it answers, and you have an exchange with it. An agent is a little bit different. You give it a goal, and it takes multiple steps to achieve that goal. It reads files, it runs code, it makes decisions, it handles problems that come up along the way. I personally am using Claude Code, Anthropic's agentic coding tool. By the time you watch this, the specific tools may have changed, but the patterns I'm describing here should apply to any agent-based workflow. Here's the core tension with agents. Agents are probabilistic systems asked to perform deterministic workflows. What does that mean? Give the same instructions across sessions, and you'll get different interpretations. Not because the AI is broken, because interpretation is how language models work. So the goal of agent orchestration isn't to make agents smarter, but it's to make their behavior predictable. The first principle, state over instructions. Prose instructions are suggestions. The agent can interpret something like validate before proceeding in many different ways. But a state file is a fact. The agent can't misinterpret a file that says state, translating. Every project in my pipeline has a canonical state file. The agent's job is to discover what state the project is in and respond accordingly, not to decide what it should do next. Here's what the pipeline looks like. Selecting a text, researching the text and generating scholarly context, translating the Latin, validating the output, generating the audio, composing the video, distributing to archive.org, GitHub, and to the blog, and finally publishing to YouTube. Then there's human review of all of these before anything goes public. Each translation has hard requirements. The system refuses to move forward unless the conditions are met. Now a word about the human role here. AI does the heavy lifting, but I make the decisions, I do the text selection, curatorial choices, translation direction, quality review. All of that's me. The AI is a tool and not really a co-author. Every video displays the original Latin alongside the English, and I can read enough Latin to catch obvious errors. I'm definitely not fluent, but I know enough to see when something's off or sounds wrong. That's not just transparency for the viewers, it's my actual verification mechanism. And I stress that the Latin is available in the videos so that people that are fluent in Latin can identify when something sounds off. Let us know in the comments, let me know. This is an important verification mechanism. So if the AI hallucinates a passage that doesn't exist in the source, hopefully I can see it, or one of the people engaging with the translations can see it. Second principle, gates over checklists. Every version of my pipeline had instructions like, remember to validate the translation before generating audio. That works most of the time. Most of the time, though, is insufficient for production workflows that you don't want to be time-consuming. Now there's a gate, code that checks preconditions before allowing any state to transition. The system refuses to enter the audio generation state unless validation has passed. A gate that prevents bad transitions is worth more than any instruction telling the agent to be careful. The agent's compliance becomes irrelevant. The structure enforces correctness. The third principle, watch out for the helpful bypass. This is by far the most dangerous failure mode. When a script fails, the agent sees a gap between the current state and the desired outcome, and its training rewards helpfulness. The natural response? Fill the gap. Create the missing file manually, synthesize the research from its own knowledge, and then proceed to the next stage. The pipeline appears to have succeeded, but the quality guarantee is totally void. The research produced by my deep research pipeline contains verified citations from actual web searches. Research the agent invents to bypass an API failure contains plausible sounding but unverified and often false claims. That's why, if any script fails, stop and report the error is policy, not suggestion. The fourth principle is parking states. Video encoding takes 60 minutes or far longer, and that's far too long for an interactive agent session. The agent could wait, but waiting wastes context and API costs while the agent has nothing to do. So the pipeline uses a parking state. When video composition starts, the system launches the encoder as a background process, records the timestamp, transitions to awaiting video, and ends the session. The next session checks if the file is stable. If the size hasn't changed for 60 seconds, encoding is complete, and we proceed. So agents aren't daemons. They start and stop, and parking states acknowledge that constraint. The insight behind all of this: constraints enable trust. An agent operating within structural limits, state machines, validation gates, provenance checks, that's an agent whose behavior can be predicted and verified. An agent operating on prose instructions and good intentions will eventually surprise you, and not for the better. These patterns apply beyond Latin translation. Any workflow where agents execute multi-step tasks, state files over prose instructions, structural gates over checklists, parking states for long operations, provenance tracking to prevent bypass, private first publishing with human review, templates over generation for consistency. Predictability beats capability. Failures must be visible, and helpful bypasses are the enemy. Now, a word on the philosophy. This project operates on a long tail assumption. Massive breakout successes is neither expected nor required, and the goal is to connect individual texts with the specific people who would find them valuable. A researcher working on a narrow topic, a pastor preparing a sermon series, a curious reader following an unexpected thread. One text reaching one person who could not have otherwise accessed it justifies this project completely. All translations are released under CC0, which is public domain, no restrictions. Anyone can take them, improve upon them, incorporate them into other projects, publish derivative works, or use them commercially. The project doesn't need to become an institution because the outputs are free for institutions or individuals to adopt. The measure of success. Someone who wants to read Rupert of Deutz, or Magnus of Sens, or Mapinius of Worms, writing about his parish hog, purchases can now do so when they could not before. Each text that crosses from inaccessible to accessible justifies the work, regardless of what happens after. The blog, the YouTube channel, my GitHub, they're all linked in the description. And I just want to thank you for watching and for subscribing. And God bless.